And by the time the whole thing blew up, it turned out there were 950 members of the Italian government who belonged to Pei Due, as well as most of the chief bankers, and Calvi and Sedona were just the principal ones. First of all, for the benefit of those not aware of Pei Due at all, around 1982, a whole bunch of people got indicted in Italy as part of this conspiracy. And what they were doing, among other things, they were doing bombings which were attributed to the Red Brigades. This was part of the CIA's Gladio project to turn Italian politics to the right. And so they were doing bombings and making the left wing look like a bunch of crazy bombers. They were also assassinating left-wing politicians, and they were laundering cocaine money from South Africa and heroin money from the Mideast through the Vatican Bank, the Banco Ambrosiano, the Franklin National Bank, run by Michele Sindona, and the Cisalpine Bank in the Bahamas, run by Roberto Calvi, who owned the Banco Ambrosiano. And the Cisalpine was owned by Calvi and Archbishop Marcinkus, who ran the Vatican Bank. And it seems the cocaine money from South America went through the World Finance Corporation in Miami, then it went to the Cisalpine Bank in the Bahamas, then it went to the Vatican Bank, which is the economic equivalent of a black hole. Anything that goes in there never comes out again. Bank examiners can't get in because, as I said, it's not on Italian soil. Well, in the course of the investigations, Roberto Calvi was found hanging from a bridge in London. And I've written about that in 3 or 4 books, and just lately somebody finally confessed that he did it. He was a mafia hitman, and of course he had no idea why he was killing Calvi. It's not polite to ask why. If you're a hitman, you're told who to kill and you go and kill him. You don't ask why. I think that's bad manners.
But
so we don't know why.
Hanging from a bridge?
Yeah, with his pockets stuffed with bricks. The first book on the Calvi mystery was called The Strange Death of God's Banker, by Della Forte. He got the answer right at the very beginning. He said the mafia did it, and they put the bricks in Calvi's pockets to make it look like the Freemasons did it. Because the first degree initiation in Freemasonry, you swear that if you ever betray your brothers in the craft, may you be hanged where the rising tide covers your dead body with your pockets stuffed with bricks. And Calvi was hanged where the rising tide did cover his dead body before he was found. But it seems the mafia did it, but why they did it, nobody knows yet. Probably they suspected Calvi of shortchanging them on one of the dope deals, and probably they were right. Calvi was an interesting person. You can't find a single photograph of him with glasses, and yet he owned 4 pairs of glasses for 4 levels of sight. But every time he saw a photographer, he never had a pair of glasses on. That indicates a high degree of vanity, I would say. He never read much. But whenever literature was discussed, Calvi would always say the same thing. There's only one book you have to read, The Godfather. That's the only book that tells you how the world is actually run. And apparently he was right, or at least the world he lived in was run that way. Michele Sindona, who ran the Franklin National Bank, which was part of the drug laundromat used by the CIA and the Pei Due and the Galen apparat and this whole underworld drug espionage network. Michele Sindona was convicted in New York of 65 counts of stock and currency fraud and of faking his own kidnapping to evade trial. And then after that, he had about a 3 or 4 year battle not to be extradited to Italy when they went to put him on trial for murder. He was defended by Richard Nixon's law firm, which is quite interesting because he was a guest at one of Nixon's inaugurations, too. When he got back to Italy, he was convicted of murdering a bank examiner. And while he was awaiting trial on further charges of being involved in the so-called Red Brigade bombings, he died in his cell either of self-administered poison or a poison given him by somebody else. Some accounts claim he cried out, "They've poisoned me." Other accounts say he just fell over without saying anything. It's like the Calvi thing. There was an argument for a couple of decades whether that was suicide or murder. The day Calvi was strangled and hung from the bridge by the mafia, his secretary fell or jumped or was pushed out of the window of the Banco Ambrosiano main headquarters in Milan. And there's a lot of strange coincidences connected with Pei Due. Licio Gelli, who's generally considered the brains behind, or at least the Italian side of it, the real brains was James Jesus Angleton back in Langtree, Virginia, counterintelligence. Angleton was the first one to own a paper shredder in Washington. He may have invented the paper shredder. He believed there was a Soviet mole in the CIA of a rank at least as high as his own. And every night before he went home, he shredded everything in his office so the Soviet mole couldn't go through his papers and find out what he was working on. Angleton was running Gladio from Langtree, but Jelly was in charge of the Italian phase of the operation, and Galen was running the German and Soviet section. The World Finance Corporation in Miami was indicted by the DA of Dade County for knowingly laundering drug money. The word knowingly is very important because everybody who's researched the subject has come to the conclusion that everybody in the banking business is laundering drug money these days. It's a question of whether they know they're doing it or they're doing it unwittingly. Chase Manhattan was involved in some of these things, but nobody could prove they knew they were dealing with drug money. Money travels back and forth between banks, and most of the time they have no idea of its ultimate source. That's why Calvi invented 200 totally non-existent banks to help launder his money, but they went through a lot of real banks too. The DA found out that 8 officers of the World Finance Corporation were former CIA agents. Now, a former CIA agent means 2 things depending on how paranoid you are. If you have a naive, trusting mind, like 1/4 of the population still has, according to the statistics I quoted before, 3/4 don't trust the government. If you trust the government, a former CIA agent means somebody who once worked for the CIA and now he's doing something else. If you read enough novels about the spy world, there are enough true books like The Double Cross System in World War II. You find out that a former intelligence agent is usually still on the payroll, but he's being paid through a numbered bank account in Switzerland, and he's still working for them. But they want to make sure that if he gets caught, it can't be traced back to the agency he's working for. That's when they're doing really criminal activities. So the World Finance Corporation was run by 8 former CIA agents who were either gone into the drug business on their own or were working for the CIA after officially being severed, and were laundering all the cocaine money from South America, which then went to the Cisalpine Bank owned by Archbishop Marcinkus and Roberto Calvi, then to the Vatican Bank, then to the Banco Ambrosiano, then through 200 ghost banks. Nobody knows where most of it landed. Although Angeli was busted in Switzerland, there was a warrant out for his arrest in Italy, but they couldn't arrest him because by the time they got to his house he had left Italy because the head of military intelligence was a member of P2 or Paydu.